I thought I had it all figured out. My life was good. Normal. Solid. My wife, Maya, and I had been together for over 7 years, and I really believed we were a team, partners in everything. We met back in college, both a little lost but finding something real in each other. She was fun, full of life, the kind of woman who could light up any room. We were opposites in a lot of ways, but somehow, it worked. I loved her energy, the way she could make me laugh even when I didn't feel like it. I thought we were perfect together, or at least as close as anyone could get. We had the usual things: a decent house, a steady job, a comfortable routine. Nothing spectacular, but it was ours. We weren't rich or glamorous, but we didn't need to be. We had each other. I was always there for her, working hard, coming home to dinner, making small talk about our day. Maya had her quirks, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. She loved to go out with her friends, sometimes a little too often for my liking, but I trusted her. I didn't have a reason not to. She'd go out on Friday nights with the girls, then come home a little tipsy, maybe stay out too late. But I'd shrug it off, let it go, because I thought it was just the way she was. That's how she had always been. Charming, outgoing, the life of every party. I didn't think much of it. If anything, I enjoyed the quiet nights in when she was out. Time to myself, to unwind from the grind. We were different, but we understood each other. Or at least I thought we did. But all that changed one night. The night everything went to hell. It started like any other Friday. Maya told me she was going out with her friends again. I didn't think anything of it. I'd seen it 100 times. But when she came home that night, something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but something felt wrong. She walked through the door, smelling like cheap vodka and some perfume I didn't recognize. Her lipstick was smeared, and her clothes were a little disheveled. I remember the way she just stood there in the hallway, trying to hide her face from me, like she wasn't sure how to act. It wasn't just the smell of alcohol. It was the look in her eyes. The way she wouldn't meet my gaze. Something shifted in me, like a switch flipped, and I knew, deep down, something wasn't right. Maya wasn't acting like herself. But instead of confronting her right away, I kept quiet, waiting for her to say something. "Hey babe, what's up?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but it was obvious she was nervous. She wasn't fooling me. Not anymore. "Out with the girls again?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Yeah, just a few drinks, nothing crazy," she said, brushing past me and heading for the kitchen. She was trying too hard to play it cool. I could hear the shakiness in her voice, but I wasn't about to push it. Not yet. She went on about her night, talking over me like everything was fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I didn't accuse her. Didn't say anything in the moment. But I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there, listening to her breathe, watching her. The house was too quiet. My mind was racing. And then, as I was about to drift off, my phone buzzed. It was her phone. Sitting on the nightstand, the screen lit up. I could see the name on the screen without picking it up. Marcus. My heart dropped. Marcus was someone she'd mentioned a few times. Just a guy from a nightclub she'd gone to a while ago with some friends. Nothing serious, she'd said. Nothing to worry about. But the way the name stood out in the dark, it hit me like a punch in the stomach. I knew, at that moment, that I had to find out what the hell was going on. The next couple of days were weird. I couldn't focus on anything. Work, food, even breathing. Every time I looked at Maya, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. That phone buzzed again the following night, and I knew exactly who it was. Marcus. But I still didn't say anything. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. But that gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach kept growing. I kept pretending everything was fine, but inside, I felt like I was unraveling. I didn't want to accuse her without proof, but every time I saw her reach for her phone, I felt my blood pressure rise. It felt like she was hiding something, and I hated that I couldn't put my finger on it. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I wasn't the kind of guy who snooped through other people's things. I trusted Maya. At least I used to. But this, whatever was happening between us, it wasn't just me. Something had shifted, and I needed answers. So, one night when she was in the shower, I grabbed her phone off the nightstand. I knew I was crossing a line, but at that point, it didn't matter anymore. I had to know what was going on. I opened her messages, and there it was, Marcus. Text after text. All from the last couple of months. At first, it was small talk, some flirty comments. Then it got worse. There were late-night conversations. Lots of emojis, a few inside jokes I didn't understand. And there were a couple of messages that stood out more than the rest. One read, "Can't wait to see you again tonight. I'll be waiting for you." Another one said, "I'm thinking about you. Wish I could kiss you right now." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I knew what that meant. There was no more pretending. She was cheating on me. No more questions. No more denial. I put the phone back down before she could come out of the shower, but I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My head was spinning. I went into the kitchen, tried to calm myself down, but the words kept echoing in my head. "I'll be waiting for you. Wish I could kiss you." The betrayal hit me like a truck. I never thought Maya would do this to me. I never thought she'd choose someone else. Especially not some guy named Marcus, some random guy from a nightclub who probably didn't care about her. When Maya came out of the shower, she acted like nothing was wrong. She smiled, asked if I wanted to watch a movie, but I couldn't look at her the same way. It was like she was a different person now, someone I didn't even recognize. "Is everything okay?" she asked, sitting down next to me. But I wasn't listening. I was already plotting what I was going to do next. "Yeah, sure," I said, pretending to smile. "Just tired." But inside, I was anything but tired. I was furious. The anger hadn't fully set in yet, but the betrayal was burning a hole in my chest. I didn't want to let it out yet. I wasn't ready to explode. So, I did the one thing I could do. I shut down. Completely. I stopped talking to her like I normally would. I stopped engaging with her in the small ways we had always done. The affectionate touches, the inside jokes, the little moments that made us feel like a team, they all disappeared. I didn't want to make her think everything was fine. I didn't want to give her that comfort. So I went cold. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. If she thought she could get away with it, then fine. I wouldn't let her see the effect it was having on me. She noticed right away, of course. Maya always noticed when something was off. She wasn't stupid. But she didn't ask. Instead, she started being more clingy, more attentive in a way that made me sick. She'd try to hold my hand, rub my back, kiss my cheek, but it wasn't real. It was fake. Desperate. I saw through it. And that's when I knew, she didn't just screw up. She chose this. She didn't just make a mistake. She made a decision. She made a choice to betray me, and I wasn't going to just let her slide by. The next few days were suffocating. Every time I saw Maya, I could barely hold it together. It was like living in a house with a ghost. A woman I thought I knew, but now, all I could see was a stranger. She kept acting like nothing had changed. The same old Maya, trying to act like she was still the woman I married. But I couldn't ignore the fact that she had been hiding something from me, lying to my face for months. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want to explode in anger. No, that would have been too easy. It wouldn't hurt her the way I wanted to hurt her. What I wanted was something deeper. Something that would leave a mark, something that would shake her to the core. She needed to feel the weight of her choices, the consequences of her betrayal. I started with the thing that was easiest for me, the one thing I could control. Marcus. I didn't care who he was. I didn't care about his story or how he ended up in Maya's life. I only knew one thing. He was part of the lie, and he was going to pay for it. I wasn't stupid. I knew what kind of guy he was. From what Maya had said about him before, mostly in passing, never in any real detail, I knew he was nothing special. Just some random guy she'd picked up at a bar. He wasn't worth anything, and yet, she'd given him something that should have been mine. And that made him my target. I didn't waste time being subtle. I contacted him first. Told him I knew everything. About the affair, the late-night texts, the things they shared behind my back. I didn't need to make him believe me. I knew I already had him where I wanted him. The fear in his voice when I made it clear I wasn't bluffing told me everything I needed to know. But I wasn't done with him yet. I wasn't going to let him get away with it, like some cheap fling that didn't matter. No, he was going to feel the consequences, too. I had connections. I worked in a field where I could use my influence, where I could make things happen with a phone call. And I did. I made a few calls, pulled a few strings, and suddenly, Marcus was out of a job. Just like that, his career was gone. A small taste of what it felt like to have everything you worked for stripped away. I knew it would hurt him. I knew it would make him feel small, humiliated, and desperate. And honestly, that was just the beginning. What really crushed him was the knowledge that his name was now attached to a scandal. I didn't just ruin his job, I made sure his reputation was torn to shreds. I made sure people knew about him, knew about what he'd done. It wasn't just a fling anymore. It was a story. And now, he was part of it. I didn't care if Maya found out what I'd done to Marcus. In fact, part of me wanted her to know. She needed to see that I wasn't some passive husband who would just sit back and take the humiliation. No. I would make sure Marcus felt the consequences. And I would make sure Maya felt them too. The problem with betrayal wasn't just the act itself. It was the web of lies that came with it. She wasn't just hurting me. She was hurting herself, too, and I wanted her to understand the full weight of that. But even as I set that in motion, I knew this wasn't enough. Not yet. What I needed was for Maya to feel it, too. To feel the loss. The emptiness. The isolation. She needed to understand that I wasn't just going to forgive her. That's when I started turning the screws. Slowly. Quietly. I didn't need to scream at her. I didn't need to make any big scenes. I needed her to feel like she was slowly drowning, unable to catch her breath. I began pulling away from her, step by step. First, it was little things. I stopped showing up for the things I used to. Dinner. I'd skip it. Movie nights. I'd cancel. I didn't explain myself. I didn't need to. I just didn't care anymore. I didn't give her the comfort of my attention, my affection, or my time. I wasn't the husband she thought she had anymore. I was someone else. Someone cold. Detached. I knew she was noticing. I knew she was getting desperate. But I wasn't about to let her off easy. I started pulling away in other ways, too. When she asked about the affair, I didn't react the way she expected. I didn't shout, didn't cry. I gave her nothing. I just stared. I let her twist in the silence. I let her wonder if I even cared anymore. And as the days went on, the guilt started to eat at her. The weight of the secret she was keeping, the shame of it all, became too much for her to bear. I wasn't done with her yet, though. I had bigger plans. Marcus was just the first step. I knew how to hit her where it would hurt the most. Her image. Her friends, her colleagues, everyone she thought she could trust. That was where I'd get her. But that wasn't today. Today, I watched her slowly unravel. And I knew it was just a matter of time before everything she thought she knew would slip away from her. Just like that. As the days turned into weeks, I could see it in her eyes. Maya was beginning to unravel. At first, it was subtle, a shift in her posture when she entered the room, the way she hesitated before she spoke to me. She didn't know how to handle the distance between us, and I wasn't making it easy for her. The more she tried to make things normal, the more I pulled away. And the more I pulled away, the more frantic she became. I could feel the change in the air. It was like walking through a room full of tension, where you didn't need to say a word for everyone to know something was wrong. Maya was trying to piece together the fragments of the life we'd once had, but she didn't realize the whole structure had already crumbled. It was like watching someone grasp at sand as it slipped through their fingers. I stopped coming home early. I stayed late at work, found other things to do, and when I was home, I made sure to keep my distance. I didn't want her touch, her words, her presence. Every time she tried to initiate something, whether it was a kiss, a hug, or just a casual conversation, I shut it down. It wasn't that I was angry anymore. That would have been too simple. No, I was cold, empty, detached. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I didn't need her apologies, because none of it mattered. What mattered was what I was doing to her. The slow, steady destruction of her comfort, her sense of control. She tried to talk to me about the distance between us, tried to get me to open up, but I just stared at her. I didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge her. I let the silence hang there, like a heavy weight in the room. And it was driving her crazy. I could see her panic. She started to second-guess everything she did, everything she said. She'd put on her best smile, but it didn't reach her eyes anymore. The more I pulled away, the more desperate she got to fix it. She'd make dinner, trying to get me to talk over a meal, but I'd barely touch the food. I'd just sit there, silent, watching her make all these efforts that meant nothing. But it wasn't just that. It was the way she'd glance at her phone, always checking it, always hoping for some kind of reassurance that everything would be okay. That I would forgive her. That I would let this blow over. But I wasn't giving her that. She was stuck in her own little world of guilt, and I wasn't about to let her escape it. The turning point came when she started to reach out to our friends. Maya had always been the social butterfly, the one who kept everyone in her orbit, the one who everyone wanted to be around. But now, she was isolated. Her calls to her friends were less frequent, and when they did happen, I could see her trying too hard to act like everything was fine, trying to play the role of the carefree, fun-loving woman everyone knew her as. But she wasn't fooling anyone. Word got around, and people started talking. I made sure of that. I didn't have to do much. A quiet whisper here, a comment there, and suddenly, her reputation wasn't so spotless anymore. The friends who once adored her now started to pull away, their sympathies shifting from her to me. I didn't need to be the one to tell them. The rumors did the work for me. I had people in her circle, people who owed me favors, and they made sure her dirty secret was shared. Just enough to make her feel the sting, but not enough to give her an easy way out. She started to notice that people weren't looking at her the same way anymore. The invitations to social events dwindled. Friends would cancel plans at the last minute. At first, she couldn't understand why. But then, she began to see the pattern. She could no longer pretend everything was fine. She was losing the very thing she'd used to keep herself safe, the image of the happy, perfect wife. Now, that image was shattered, and I wasn't going to help her pick up the pieces. At work, it was the same. I didn't need to do much there either. I knew just how to make her feel small, insignificant. I planted the right seeds in just the right ears. Conversations were started behind her back, doubts whispered, questions raised. She could feel it. The look she got from her colleagues, the coldness when she walked into a room. It wasn't obvious, not at first, but it was enough to make her realize that the walls were closing in. Slowly but surely, her world was getting smaller. She started questioning herself. I could see it in the way she looked at me. The uncertainty, the doubt in her eyes. She knew that what she had done wasn't something I was ever going to forgive. She knew that the way I was treating her wasn't a temporary thing. It was permanent. And yet, she kept trying. She kept asking what she could do, how she could fix things. But I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her efforts were as meaningless to me as the empty promises she had made. I wasn't the same man she married. And deep down, I knew she was starting to understand that. She had thought she could walk away from this, that everything would just go back to normal, but it wasn't going to. The worst part. She didn't even know how far I was willing to go. Maya's desperation started to show. The more she tried to reach me, the colder I became. She no longer had the luxury of pretending she hadn't crossed a line. The guilt was eating her alive, and the harder she tried to fix it, the more she pushed me further away. It was almost like watching her drown, slowly, and all I could do was stand on the shore, watching her struggle. She kept doing the same thing over and over, trying to get me to engage with her, trying to bring back the version of me she thought she knew. But I wasn't that guy anymore. I wasn't the guy who would laugh at her jokes, listen to her vent about her day, or pretend like everything was fine. That version of me had died the night I found out. Now, I was just a shadow, a man on autopilot who had one goal, to make her feel the weight of what she had done. The silence between us grew heavier with each passing day. It was suffocating. Maya began trying harder to get my attention, showing up in the kitchen in cute outfits, trying to make my favorite meals, offering to go out and do the things we used to love. But I wasn't playing along. I barely even acknowledged her. She started to show signs of panic. The small, quiet things she'd done to manipulate me before, like offering her love in little gestures, no longer worked. Now they just made me angrier. How dare she try to play the role of the dutiful wife after everything? The worst part was the way she looked at me sometimes, almost pleading with her eyes, as if she expected me to be the man I used to be, the man who could forgive her and move on. She still couldn't grasp the depth of what she had done. She still thought I could just let it go, that we could go back to normal. But normal was gone. That life was gone. And the more she tried to force it back, the more she was pushing me away. I could see the toll it was taking on her. She wasn't sleeping much. She was always restless, looking for answers she'd never get. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was messy. Her smile, the one that used to light up a room, had started to fade, replaced by a tense, forced version that didn't fool anyone. She tried to pretend that everything was fine, but I could see through it. I could always see through her. The emotional strain was taking a toll on her, but I wasn't about to comfort her. Why should I? She'd had everything, and she had thrown it all away for some random guy. A guy who probably didn't even know her middle name. He was nothing, a blip in her life, and yet, she had chosen him over me. The thought of that still made my blood boil. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room, staring at the TV without really watching, Maya sat down beside me. She tried her usual tactic, casual conversation, soft voice, trying to sound innocent, like nothing was wrong. She asked me if I was okay, if I wanted to talk. But I didn't. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. So I just stared at the screen, not bothering to respond. It wasn't until she reached for my hand, that same soft, pleading touch that used to melt me, that something inside me snapped. I pulled my hand away, sharply. She flinched, but she didn't say anything. I saw her face fall, the flicker of hurt in her eyes, but I didn't care. I don't think you understand, I said, my voice barely a whisper, but cold. I wasn't looking at her when I said it. This isn't something you can fix. Not anymore. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want her apologies, her excuses. I didn't want her tears. I wanted her to feel it, to feel how much I had been hurt, how much I still was. She sat there in silence for a long time, and I could see it in her eyes, the realization that there was nothing she could do to fix it. There was no magic apology, no grand gesture, no "I'll change" speech that would make this right. The trust was gone. The respect was gone. And the love. It was buried deep under layers of anger and betrayal. I watched her as she sat there, trying to hold back tears, trying to act like she was fine. But she wasn't. The walls were closing in around her, and she knew it. She didn't have anyone to turn to. Her friends had started to pull away, her colleagues were whispering behind her back, and I wasn't giving her the comfort she needed. She was alone, and for the first time, she realized just how far gone things were. I didn't care. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel bad for what I was doing to her. This was the price she had to pay. And it wasn't even close to being over. The weeks after that moment were the hardest for Maya. I could see her trying to hold on to whatever shred of dignity she had left, but it was slipping through her fingers faster than she could catch it. She'd never been good at dealing with consequences, and now she was drowning in them. There were nights when I could hear her crying, quietly, when she thought I was asleep. But I wasn't. I heard every sound, every sob, every shaky breath as she tried to stifle the guilt and regret that consumed her. It didn't move me. Not anymore. It was almost pitiful, the way she tried to act like everything was fine in front of other people. She would still show up to work, still try to put on a smile for her colleagues, but it was forced. The cracks were showing everywhere, and she couldn't hide it anymore. People weren't stupid. Her friends, the ones who used to flock to her, were starting to talk. She was losing them, piece by piece. And honestly, I didn't care. I wasn't interested in saving her. She'd made her choice, and now she had to deal with it. The more she isolated herself, the more desperate she became to make things right. But I wasn't her savior. I wasn't going to pull her out of the mess she'd made. If anything, I was watching from the sidelines, letting it play out. I wasn't going to throw her a lifeline. She could sink, and I was content to watch it happen. There was one night, a few weeks after the incident with the hand, when she came home late from work. I'd been sitting in the living room, the usual silence between us stretching on. I wasn't doing anything in particular, just waiting. I knew she'd try something, some last-ditch effort to connect. And I was right. She walked through the door and, for the first time, she looked defeated. Not angry, not pleading, just broken. She looked at me, but her eyes didn't have that spark of defiance anymore. She wasn't the same woman who'd walked out on me before, thinking everything would be fine when she came back. No, this was different. She sat down next to me, closer than usual, but I didn't move. I didn't acknowledge her presence at first. She reached for my hand, but this time, I didn't pull away. I just let her hold it, not because I cared, but because I wanted to see how far she'd go. How much she still needed me to make things okay. It was sad, really, how badly she wanted my forgiveness. She whispered something about feeling lost, about how she didn't know what she was doing anymore. She told me she felt like she was losing everything. Her friends, her career, herself. She was right, of course. But I wasn't about to make her feel better. Not this time. I looked at her finally, really looked at her, and I saw everything she had become. A woman who destroyed the life we built together. A woman who was now scrambling for any scrap of validation she could get. But she wasn't going to get it from me. Not anymore. I don't know how to fix this, she said, her voice cracking. I don't even know if I can fix this. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She already knew the truth. She already knew that nothing she could say or do would undo the damage she'd caused. I wasn't looking for closure. I wasn't looking for answers. I was just looking for her to feel the weight of her choices. She tried again, this time more forcefully, asking if there was anything she could do to make it right. But her desperation wasn't what I wanted anymore. I didn't need her to fix it. I didn't even need her to apologize. The words meant nothing. It was too late for that. And that's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to let her off easy. I wasn't going to walk away and pretend like I was fine. No, this wasn't about moving on. This was about watching her lose everything. Watching her squirm. Watching her pay the price for everything she'd done. I had already ruined Marcus. And now it was her turn. The next day, I reached out to a few people in her circle. Her co-workers, friends, the ones who had been closest to her. I planted a few more seeds. I didn't have to do much. I just made sure they all knew what had happened. I didn't tell them everything. No, that would have been too obvious. I just made sure they knew enough to make her uncomfortable. Enough for her to feel the humiliation in every conversation, in every glance she got when she entered a room. It wasn't enough to just isolate her physically. I wanted her to feel it in every part of her life. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions every single day. I wanted her to understand that the trust she had shattered wasn't something you could just glue back together with a few empty words. And as the days passed, I could see it happening. I could see the isolation creeping in on her again, this time in a way that she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just that she was losing friends. It was the way people started to treat her. The pity in their eyes. The uncomfortable silences when she walked into a room. She was starting to see the full scope of her mistake. She wasn't just losing me. She was losing herself. And it was beautiful to watch. It was the little things that got to her, the things that piled up, one by one, until she couldn't ignore them anymore. It wasn't one big, dramatic moment. It was the slow, constant pressure, the daily reminders that she'd ruined everything. She was losing more than just her social life or her career. She was losing her sense of self. The woman who'd been so confident, so sure of herself, was now just a shadow of who she used to be. I watched it all, and I have to admit, it felt good. Watching her squirm. Watching her try to keep everything together while the walls closed in. There was a satisfaction in knowing she was breaking, little by little, even if she didn't realize it. She'd thought she could have it all. She'd thought she could screw around and still have the perfect life waiting for her at home. But I was done with that. I wasn't going to let her pretend everything was okay. Maya started to come home earlier, but it wasn't out of any real desire to be with me. She was running away from the looks and whispers at work. Running away from the uncomfortable silence when she went out with her friends. She tried to make more of an effort at home, cooking dinners, making small talk, but it was all hollow. She couldn't fix what was broken with a meal or a few nice words. One evening, she asked if I wanted to go out for dinner. She was trying to be casual about it, like we were still the same couple, still the same happy people we'd been before all of this. But I wasn't buying it. The idea of pretending everything was fine made my stomach turn. I didn't want to be the nice guy anymore. I didn't want to give her any hope. I just wanted to see her crack. I told her I wasn't hungry, that I was fine staying in. She didn't argue, but I could see the disappointment on her face. For a moment, I almost felt a twinge of guilt. Almost. But then I reminded myself, this wasn't about me anymore. This was about her realizing the full extent of her choices. This was about her learning that some things can't be fixed by just pretending to care. As the days dragged on, she became more withdrawn. I could see her watching me from across the room, waiting for a sign, any sign, that I was still in this with her. But there were no signs. I didn't need to say anything. My indifference spoke volumes. And she hated it. I could tell it was eating her alive. Every time she tried to reach for me, to touch me, to speak to me as if we were the same people we'd been, I would pull back. It wasn't that I was being cruel. It was just that I didn't care. I was done. And she knew it. Her attempts to make things better only pushed her further into her own misery. I think deep down, she knew she had no one else to turn to. She had burned every bridge. The friends who used to adore her were now whispering behind her back, the people at work were treating her like she didn't exist, and the one person who should have been there for her, the person she had used for years, was now the one she was begging for mercy. I had made sure of that. Every conversation I'd had, every whisper I'd planted in the right ears, had served to tighten the noose around her neck. She wasn't just losing her reputation, she was losing herself. The woman who once held everything together, who was always the life of the party, was now slowly fading into the background. I could see it in the way she carried herself, her shoulders hunched, her eyes dull. She wasn't the confident woman she used to be. She was hollow, and I couldn't bring myself to care. One night, after a long day of nothing but silence between us, she came home late again. I was already sitting on the couch, like usual, watching TV but not really watching anything. She walked in, looked at me, and said something about how she wanted to talk. She was practically begging, her voice shaky. But I didn't move. I didn't even look at her. She sat down across from me, her hands twisting in her lap, and I could see the panic starting to set in. She was on the verge of tears again, but I wasn't going to let her use that as leverage. She had used her tears before, when she wanted to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her, to make me soften up. But I wasn't the man she thought I was anymore. She started to apologize again, over and over, saying how sorry she was, how she couldn't believe what she'd done. But it all sounded hollow to me. It was like she was saying the words she thought she should say, not the words that actually meant anything. I didn't respond. I just let her talk, watching her break down as she realized there was no redemption here. When she finished, she sat there, looking at me like she was waiting for some kind of answer. But I didn't give her one. I just stared at her, emotionless. I wanted her to feel the silence. I wanted her to feel what it was like to be abandoned by the one person who used to love her, who used to believe in her. Her eyes searched mine for something, anything, but there was nothing there. I'd made sure of it. She wasn't going to get the closure she was hoping for. She wasn't going to get the forgiveness she thought she deserved. She stood up after a while, defeated, and walked out of the room. I heard the sound of her heels clicking on the floor as she retreated to the bedroom, but I didn't follow. I wasn't going to chase after her. I wasn't going to play the good husband, the forgiving one. She had made her bed. Now, she had to lie in it. And I wasn't about to make it any easier for her. The weeks following that night felt like a slow, inevitable countdown. Maya was running on fumes, physically and emotionally drained, but still trying to act like everything was normal. I could see the way she kept pretending, how she tried so hard to show me that she was still the woman I'd once loved. But it was too late for that. The image I had of her, the one I had held onto all those years, was shattered. Every forced smile, every tear, every touch she tried to initiate only reminded me of the betrayal. I noticed the way she started avoiding me, too. She'd leave the house earlier in the mornings, stay late at work, find any excuse to not be around me. But I wasn't fooled. She wasn't trying to distance herself to give me space. She was avoiding facing what she'd done. She couldn't bear the quiet, couldn't handle the way I had pulled away. So she kept herself busy, kept herself distracted, but I could tell it was eating away at her. It wasn't until one evening, when I got home earlier than usual, that I saw it all laid out in front of me. Maya wasn't home, but there was something about the house that felt different. The silence hit me first, like it had grown deeper. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I could feel it in the air. Something was off. That's when I noticed her phone on the kitchen counter. It was buzzing. Texts from Marcus. That name. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, a knot I'd been carrying since I first found out about their affair. I didn't hesitate. I picked up her phone. The screen lit up with Marcus's name, and I saw the messages. They were still talking. Not as often as before, but enough to tell me that whatever Maya had been telling me, whatever lies she'd been spinning, were just that, lies. She hadn't ended things with him. She hadn't truly stopped seeing him. She was still keeping him in her life, keeping the connection alive, like it was something she could compartmentalize. And that's when I realized that this wasn't just about the affair. This wasn't about a one-time mistake. This was about who she had become. She had made a choice, and now she was living with the consequences. Trying to pretend like it was just a little bump in the road, like she could keep going with everything else, pretending everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. And it would never be fine. I didn't bother texting Marcus back. That would have been too easy. I wasn't looking for closure anymore. I wasn't looking for a confession from Maya or any sort of emotional conversation. I was past that. I wanted her to feel it. I wanted her to know, without a doubt, that she was losing everything. She had already lost my trust, but now she was losing herself. When Maya came home that evening, I didn't greet her. I didn't even look up from my spot on the couch. I could hear the sound of her heels tapping across the floor, her footsteps light but hesitant. When she saw me sitting there, the phone in my hand, she froze. She knew. She could tell just by the way I was sitting that something was wrong. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but there was panic in her voice. I didn't respond. I just held up her phone, the screen showing the messages from Marcus. The silence between us stretched out like a rubber band ready to snap. Maya's face drained of color, her eyes wide, like she'd just been caught doing something she couldn't explain away anymore. I watched her try to find words, but she couldn't. She stammered, her lips trembling, but there was no excuse that could come close to justifying what I was seeing. There was no more pretending. There was no more playing the victim or crying about the mistake she'd made. I could see the shame in her eyes, but it didn't move me. She had done this to herself. "You really think I didn't know?" I finally said, my voice low, calm, but sharp. "I already knew. And you're still talking to him." She didn't have anything to say to that. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then just looked at me. That was all. No apology, no explanation, just nothing. I could tell she was broken, but I wasn't going to comfort her. I wasn't going to make it better for her. I stood up then, still not looking at her, and walked out of the room. I didn't say anything more. I didn't have to. Maya was left standing there, watching me, helpless. She knew I had seen everything. I wasn't angry, not in the way I used to be. Now I was just done. I was past the point of rage, past the point of trying to understand why she had done it. It didn't matter. The only thing left was watching her unravel, watching her realize that nothing could fix the mess she had made. The next few days were tense. Maya tried harder than ever to make things right. She called me at work, left me messages, tried to make small talk when I came home. She even tried apologizing again, telling me how sorry she was, how she didn't want to lose me. But none of it worked. Every time she spoke, it was like I was hearing it from a stranger. The woman I knew was gone. The woman I had loved was buried under layers of lies and broken promises. And I wasn't going to dig her back up. Not this time. The days started to blur together, like I was living in a long, drawn-out movie, and I was the one controlling the script. Maya had stopped trying to force conversations with me. She'd realized, at some point, that there was no point in apologizing anymore. She had used up all her chances. The damage had been done, and no amount of pleading or regret was going to change it. I could see how desperate she was to hold on to something, to salvage whatever dignity she had left, but it was too late for that. She had already put herself in a position where nothing could fix it. Not her apologies, not her acts of kindness, and certainly not her tears. I didn't know if she was expecting me to eventually soften, to go back to being the man I used to be. But I couldn't. And I wouldn't. There was no going back to who we had been. There was no forgiveness waiting for her on the other side of her self-inflicted mess. One evening, after another failed attempt at talking to me, she disappeared into the guest room. I didn't follow. I didn't even bother. She could hide all she wanted, but there was nothing she could do to change the fact that I had already made up my mind. I was done. And she wasn't going to get a second chance. That night, after I heard her settle into the room, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I started packing. I wasn't leaving, not physically, but I was getting ready to make my exit in every other way. I started gathering the things I'd once kept close to me, things that reminded me of the life we had built. The photos, the souvenirs, the little mementos that had once felt like symbols of our life together. Everything went into boxes. It was almost like I was preparing for the funeral of our relationship. I was stripping away the layers of our past, taking down all the signs that showed we'd ever been happy, that we'd ever been us. I wasn't just emotionally checked out. I was physically erasing her from my life. The next morning, I didn't tell her anything. I didn't need to. She came downstairs, her face pale, but she didn't say a word. She saw the boxes. She saw the photos, the trinkets, all the things that had once meant so much to both of us, now packed away like they never mattered. She stood there, frozen for a second, before her voice cracked. "What's happening?" I didn't even look up at her. "I'm done. I told you before, Maya, there's no coming back from this. It's over." It was cold. I hadn't meant to sound that cold, but there was no warmth left in me. Not for her. Not after everything. She had no response. No plea, no words of salvation. It was like she'd already given up on trying to get me to understand. She walked out, disappearing into the backyard, and I didn't follow her. I knew she was probably breaking down out there, but I couldn't be the one to comfort her. Not this time. And I think in that moment she finally understood. She understood that all of her attempts to claw her way back into my good graces were futile. It wasn't about regret anymore. It wasn't about fixing things. It was about realizing that I was never going to be the same. For weeks, I stayed in the same house, living parallel lives with her, but completely removed. I could feel the tension every time we were in the same room. Her eyes constantly looked for some sign of forgiveness, some crack in the wall she could break through. But it never came. I stayed distant, detached, like I was living with a stranger. Eventually, it all came to a head. One night, She came to me again, just as I was about to go to bed. She was standing there in the doorway, her eyes swollen from crying, her hands shaking. She was begging me to talk to her. I could see the desperation in her face, the fear that was starting to consume her. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, Ethan. Please just say something. Tell me what I need to do. Tell me how I can make this right." I finally looked at her. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered everything. I remembered Marcus. I remembered the lies, the way she had torn everything down without a second thought. "There's nothing you can do," I told her, my voice steady, unwavering. "You've done everything you can, Maya. And it's not enough. It'll never be enough." She collapsed to the floor, sobbing. But I didn't move. I didn't comfort her. I wasn't going to play that part anymore. I wasn't going to be the guy who picked up the pieces. She had destroyed us. And now, she had to face it alone. The next day, she moved out. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even ask for my forgiveness. I think by then, she knew that it wasn't something I was ever going to give her. She packed up her things and left, taking whatever was left of her pride with her. I stayed in the house. Alone. It was quieter now, but there was still an emptiness there. A coldness that I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. But deep down, I knew it was for the best. The life I had known with Maya was gone. And no matter how long it took, I wasn't going to let myself go back to that place. The only thing left for me now was to move forward. It's been months now. Maya's gone, her stuff cleared out, and I've been living this new life, one that I didn't plan for but somehow had to accept. People in my circle have noticed the change in me. Some ask where she is, and I just tell them she moved out, that things didn't work out. I don't get into the details. There's no point in explaining what happened, and frankly, I'm tired of talking about it. I've taken to doing a lot of things I never thought I'd do. I've started running, going to the gym regularly, eating better, getting back into hobbies I had pushed aside for her over the years. It's strange, but every step I take forward feels like I'm putting another mile between myself and the life I had with her. The weight on my chest that used to feel unbearable is finally starting to lift, piece by piece. But I won't lie, it's not easy. The silence is loud. Every now and then, I catch myself staring at the empty side of the bed where she used to sleep, and for a moment, it hits me, she's not coming back. And it stings, even though I know it's better this way. There are times when I want to reach out to her, to ask her if she's doing okay, if she's learned anything from what she put me through. But I don't. I resist, because I know there's nothing left to salvage. She made her choice, and I made mine. The hardest part wasn't losing Maya. It was losing the version of myself I had been while we were together. The guy who trusted too much. The guy who believed love could fix anything. The guy who kept forgiving and hoping things would work out. That guy is gone now. He's been replaced by someone who doesn't let people walk all over him, who doesn't give second chances when they're clearly undeserved. And I can't say I miss him. There's a strange satisfaction in knowing I'm stronger now. There's a quiet pride in the fact that I didn't break down like I thought I might. I didn't crumble under the weight of betrayal. I just let the pain fuel me. Let it drive me to a place where I don't need anyone to tell me I'm okay, because I know I am. I don't need anyone to validate my feelings anymore. I'm at peace with the anger, the hurt, and the cold indifference I've carried with me since everything came to light. As for Marcus, well, I made sure his life didn't stay the same. I didn't just let him off the hook. I reached out to some people I knew, pulled some strings, and I watched his career fall apart. I won't pretend it didn't feel good. Watching him lose his job, his reputation, his footing, it was just as satisfying as it was necessary. He had thought he could slip in and out of her life without consequences. But there's always a price to pay. And I made sure he paid his. But the real satisfaction didn't come from Marcus or even from the job he lost. It came from knowing that, in the end, Maya couldn't run from what she did. She thought she could keep her secret, keep everything wrapped up in a neat little lie, but the truth came out. And she paid the price too. Her friends stopped calling. Her co-workers treated her differently. The damage was permanent. And maybe that's the hardest part for her to accept. The fact that, no matter how hard she tries to pretend otherwise, she's never going to be the same person. She can't undo the choices she made. I heard from a mutual friend a few weeks ago. Maya's doing better at least, that's what they said. She's trying to put her life back together, trying to find something that resembles normal again. But from what I hear, she's struggling. She's got this hole in her now, this emptiness that no amount of work or new relationships can fill. She's broken, in a way that's hard to fix. And that feels like justice to me. As for me, I'm still rebuilding. There's a part of me that will always be scarred by what happened, by what I went through. But I've learned to live with it. I've learned to let it go. I'm not angry anymore. I don't need to be. The damage has been done, but it doesn't define me. I know now that no one, not Maya or anyone else, has the power to take away my peace unless I let them. And I won't. I've moved on. It might take years for me to truly forget the betrayal, but I'm not going to let it destroy me. And I'm not going to let it keep me from living the life I want, one that's mine and mine alone. The door to my past is closed. And as far as I'm concerned, it's locked.